Hello, welcome back to another Onkruid video. This has been so long, I really have no idea how the hell I do this anymore. I don't know how this works. I have a free day on my hands. I'm gonna try and tackle a little bit of this stack. Those are the books that I have read already, but I still need to put my notes into Obsidian. I'm starting off with one I read in Switzerland. It's The Hour of the Wolf, a book I read on holiday, on vacation this year. And I'm gonna try and make a dent in this stack. And just talk a little bit about the books that pass through the whole note writing machine that I will be today. Maybe see if I still have it in me, if I can still do this, if I still have a mastery of the English voice to kind of produce the speech necessary to create YouTube videos, but no idea where we're going. Let's just have some fun together. The Hour of the Wolf by Bhutto is a story about her. It's a biography, it's a bit of a memoir, and it's about supposedly how a dog saved her life. She talks about her dog in a sense of getting her out of an abusive relationship, because seeing the abusive person, the real piece of shit she was together with for almost 10 years if I'm not mistaken, seeing him finally mistreat her dog, that was the final straw. Although the final straw should have been pulled like years and years before. The thing this book does well, I think, is convey the sense of hopelessness and stuckness a person in an abusive relationship can feel when they still want to get something out of that relationship, because she is human, she wants connection, she wants love, she wants to feel loved, she wants to feel appreciated, she wants intimacy, and most of all, she has a wish to have children. Only about 100 pages into the book does she realize that she doesn't want to have children with this person, which was just like, open your eyes. But I don't want to judge too hard, because I do really empathize with this feeling of, yeah, but if I let this person go, will I ever find someone else? And I do want to have a family, so that kind of goal, that need, sometimes maybe even is a larger priority than your own safety, your own well-being, your own feelings of real connectedness towards a person, because you're staying together for that larger goal of building a family. Although it makes you blind as hell, of course, because you will never start a family that you actually want to have with a person as abusive as the partner she is with. What I didn't really like about the author furthermore is how she exclaims to have this kind of huge love for dogs. She's a journalist as well, so she does research, and she has some really interesting, insightful things to say about the domestication of dogs and how wolves evolved towards dogs. A really interesting part of that non-fiction side of this book was how apparently research shows that the dogs that learn to look into our eyes, the wolves, I guess, that learn to look into our eyes, they were more aptly fit for survival, because looking at dogs releases oxytocin inside of us, releases the binding love hormone, and makes us want to care for them. And how apparently dogs have learned to determine cues from looking at us, about how we are feeling, about what is happening, about where the food is. Dogs are apparently more apt at being sensitive towards those cues than chimpanzees, than the animals who are most closely related to us. So that was a really interesting part of the book. One of the only other subjects she writes some worthwhile things about is paradoxically love, because she uses the words of other authors. She talks about this author telling us that we are small creatures as humans in the universe, and that the only thing that can help us bear this vastness that we are embedded in is love. She also talks about how she needs to believe in this idea of love being pure, of love being something that is able to revitalize, of love being something that is able to break down and reconstruct in cycles. And I think that is quite a beautiful way of looking at love, and I definitely empathize also with her feeling, her need of seeing love in this way. Seeing love as a bridge towards a better phase of her life, and seeing love as something allowing her to recover from what she experienced. And at the end of the book there is a bit of an epilogue where she does discuss getting together with another human being that is actually normal, and that offers her a much more healthy version of love and a loving relationship. And I do believe they were even starting up a family, if I'm not mistaken. I just think that in general the book was like too long for the little amount of real value, real merit it offered, for the little amount of real worth that was in it. It was more kind of reading into a self-centered person's diary, a person that is kind of blind to their own role and responsibility and what they are going through, which again is, I think, the blindness of love in an abusive relationship, even though it feels a bit wrong to call it love, because how can you love a monster like him? Maybe not to judge him because we don't learn about his attachment history and stuff, but just in general, yeah, no, the book didn't really strike my fancy. I didn't necessarily regret reading it in the end because I went through it quite quickly, but looking at all these other books in my room, I can't help but thinking like, I would have rather spent that same amount of time getting through another one of these unread gems that are probably on the shelves here still. It was one of the first times in a long while, and probably one of the last times again, that I bought a book purely based on its cover. You shouldn't judge a book by its cover. I guess that's shown here again because the cover is way cooler than the actual story. Gave it 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. I think it's more of a 2.5, maybe 2.3. Didn't really do that much for me. Also wasn't the worst book I've ever read, but yeah, no, I wouldn't recommend it. On to the next one, because we do still have a ways to go. I don't think every book should be too significant or too life-changing. I don't think a book only has merit when it really, really sticks or when it really changes the way you look at life. But this little booklet right here, Piaggio by Hendrik, Groen, it really didn't do that. But like, it didn't really thrive in its insignificance. It was quaint, it was quite quippy, it was a little escapade into the love life of two borderline elderly people. Not that they have borderline and are elderly, but they are on the edge of being called elderly, still looking for some new revitalizing love in life. And they do this by impulsively going on an adventure through the Italian and Swiss and French parts of the Alps, heading their way back home towards Holland, towards the Netherlands, in a little Piaggio, in a little red truck-like, very small, very tiny, very old, very messy little car that they use to travel back throughout Europe. They get to know each other and they kind of, I guess, support their own individual alcohol addiction because they are clearly alcoholics. They get drunk almost every night of their trip. The thing I did like about it, and the thing that did prompt me to give it still 2 out of 5 stars, is first of all that its mission was not to make a large impact. It was also given to me for free because it's part of the book week. Camera is not really getting sharper, but you will just have to believe me that says book week, boekenweek in Dutch, where you get these little small books during a certain week of the year whenever you buy books in a bookshop. I love most of them. I have really enjoyed some of them. The Crater was one I really enjoyed, of which I did write out the notes of that already because it's already back in my bookcase. And then What We Saw by Hannah Berwoods is also right up there out of frame, but that means that I have written my notes of that as well. They are short reads, short and sweet little stories, but they can kind of provide you with a little escape from your day-to-day life for a couple of hours. I guess maybe if it's really this short and there's also not that many words on a page, it might just be like an hour or two. Still though, they don't expect each other to be this perfect new partner. They don't expect each other to liven up their lives to the sense of like the partner and their relationship being the only source of meaning in their life. The enjoyment they are looking for in their newfound, first of all, friendship and only then love is enough. It doesn't have to be more. And that's maybe I think what I liked about this book's vision on love. I don't know why that's a recurring theme right now, but hey, let's just row with the boat we are sitting in right now. Is that love should be fun. It should be fun to explore each other, to kind of explore life together, to see what little nooks and crannies the other person has and what little quirks they have, and maybe the difficult side of the other person as well, kind of getting to know each other's manual. That should also be a fun endeavor to embark upon together, and that's what this book portrays nicely as well. So that's definitely also a source of the 2 stars. Yeah, okay, it was still a fun little book. Yeah. One of the sequences in the book that did leave an impact on me and that I did write down in my notes was about how his sister is living in ontological incongruence. She is just focused on little enjoyment of day-to-day life, not really even achieving that, but the general sense of things and wanting to be happy or wanting to strive for more than just happiness, rather wanting to find some meaning doing something with your life, looking at life more from an existential point of view. That is really not up to her. And she is telling her brother like, hey, you should just do what makes you happy and what gives you meaning, gives you a sense of purpose. And then she's like, maybe I should do that too. And she kind of scares, she gets scared by the thought, she gets perturbed by it, and she immediately just changed the subject, probably realizing that she's not getting everything out of life that she could, or maybe even should get. It doesn't prompt her to change her life necessarily right now, I think, but in some people I think it might too. Realizing that the advice you're giving someone else about how to shape their life could shape your own in a more positive sense. She doesn't undertake a trip through Europe though. It doesn't really set her into action. It doesn't set her passion ablaze. She just stays in her tight, nice little world. Safety is not always the best virtue in life. Sometimes you need to take risks to really squeeze out the value that life has to offer if you go and look for it, if you try and create it. One fun little memory I will cherish about this book though is that when my mom came over here to deliver some more cases and some more cupboards and closets, like the gray one up there. When she came to deliver them to my house, she laid on my bed for a second and she was like, all these books, man, I really don't read. What do you recommend to me? And she, first of all, she took Think by Simon Blackburn, which is, I believe, right here, underneath my book of Levina, well, the book I borrowed. She took Think by Simon Blackburn, which is like an introduction into philosophy and broad philosophical ideas. And I was like, Mother, I appreciate you trying to get into reading, but don't start with something like this. And then I gave her this book, like, this is maybe more up to your speed, a bit more lighthearted. And she quite enjoyed it. She didn't read it all the way through. I think she read only like 10 pages because then we had to go. I was still writing out some reports when she was here, but she quite enjoyed her little time with that book. Maybe it is my mission to get my mom into reading in my life still. My dad is already into reading and I am giving him books for every occasion, like Christmas or Father's Day or his birthday, and I'm giving his books that kind of align with my worldview. Some Jaloom books, some Dirk de Wachter books, just to kind of ease him into a different way of thinking, a bit more of a positive, optimistic way of thinking maybe. So who knows, maybe in the end I think with my mom my mission will be more to get her reading in the first place. So some lighthearted fiction like this, even if I do give it only 2 out of 5 stars, still has its merit there. And then 2 days later we have The Nazi and the Psychiatrist by Jack Elhai. It's a book I bought on a flea market randomly. I think it was on a Thursday, not that matters, with my mom. In a flea market we never go to normally, but I just saw it and it interested me. And it was before I heard about the contents of the book and before the Nuremberg film came out, which I saw last year with a good friend of mine the day before my birthday. Seeing that film actually prompted me then to start reading this book. It was just in my personal library, but I hadn't touched it before, but seeing the movie made me want to know the more intricate parts of the story, the more ins and outs. I wanted to have the full text with me. The story is about Douglas Kelly, an American psychiatrist that kind of enlisted himself in the army, and he was sent to Europe, to Luxembourg first, to Nuremberg, after the Second World War, when it was really just ending off, and when a lot of the highest ranking German officials that were still alive at that time, that hadn't killed themselves or have been killed, they had to stand trial for what they did. And his job was to kind of make sure they survived until the tribunal was set up and they were able to stand trial, and also check whether they didn't go insane or whether they were not insane and therefore not responsible for their deeds. It's a cool insight into how a troubled mind looks into troubled minds, because Douglas Kelly was not an angel himself. He had this anger problem, he had this idea of having to be ground, having to be life-changing, world-changing, having to leave its impact, leave his mark, because otherwise he would not be worthy. He had to do something special, and it made him a bit egocentric, a bit narcissistic, maybe a bit just with a delusion of grandeur that fueled his behavior, that fueled him to look for the root cause of evil, of what made these Nazi people capable of doing such harm to humanity, of being such monsters. And in the end, his conclusion was actually, I think, a bit disillusioning for him. His conclusion is mainly that this Nazi personality, these personality traits, or this mental illness maybe that makes a person capable of doing such unspeakable things, doesn't really exist. The truth of the matter is that the people that are capable of doing such things are also capable of fighting for the rights of, for example, stray cats and dogs, like Hermann Göring did. The people capable of maltreating millions of Jews in concentration camps can then also just go home to their family and have a family dinner in the evening, looking their wife in the eyes lovingly and asking their children how school went. The main premise is something that I also learned in Man's Search for Meaning, back when I read that. No, it's right here. Classic. Really a must read. I know everybody says that, but it is true. Is that human beings have the capacity for both in them, for evil and good, and that it's maybe like more of a matter of circumstance, a matter of environment, which side comes out. And the circumstances that led to the Nazi regime being able to thrive were the way Germany was feeling at that point in time after the First World War. They were prone to be paranoid, and paranoia leads to wanting to dominate, wanting to regain control, leads to murder. And I think that's why, Kelly thinks that's why Germany kind of accepted fascism as a kind of solution to their inner turmoil with open arms. Many of the people he described in his book, he probably would have described as psychopaths if he did know about the term at that point in time, or if he was more familiar with it, because they are people that don't really seem to care about other human beings, people that don't let feelings impact their rationality, and people that really will do anything, move anybody out of their way as well to get what they want. Goering and his friends were also just extreme workaholics. They really did a lot. He also talks a lot about Rosenberg in the book, the Nazi philosopher, who is also the main subject of the Spinoza Problem by Yalom, which is a book that is also still on the stack there and I need to type my notes out of. And that's interesting, I think, to see like the people supporting Hitler, but that are more on like the thinking side of things and really thought out the anti-Semitic framework, kind of fueled all that hate, all that hatred, fueled the war in ideology. One of the great mysteries in this whole story still is how Goering in the end managed to commit suicide, because he did get a cyanide pill in some way, shape or form. Nobody knows to this day, I think, how he got it. It's probably an inside job. Somebody smuggled it into his cell because they check all of his clothes, every part of his body, all of his cavities, I can imagine, for hidden cyanide pills all the time. And the prison guard was really at a maximum capacity at that point, because there were suicides already in the prison, people hanging themselves from their prison doors and stuff like that. So they were really, really on a close watch, and still he managed to fool everyone and commit suicide. And the crazy part, one of the most crazy parts about this story, is the torment Kelly was going through himself. The book says that he was a psychiatrist that actually needed a psychiatrist but didn't go to one. He soared through his children's lives as an out-of-control high-speed train, with his unbound anger, with his rage, with his immense pressure internally to still do something, to still mean something, which he kind of failed to do with the Nazis because he didn't discover what he wanted to discover, and he kind of projected that pressure to make something, to create something, to be of meaning, of significance, of value onto his children, prompting his son at the age of 7 to already think about how to murder his father to get away from him. And then in the end, and this is the real kicker, Douglas Kelly commits suicide in the same way Hermann Goering did, as kind of a final testimony to this idea that I can shake off, but this idea that he couldn't shake off what happened to him, and he couldn't shake off the deep psychological, pathological impact his meetings with Goering, his hours spent together in one-on-one contact had on him. I think it really ruined, contaminated, corrupted his psyche to, in some ways, meet his match in that prison cell, I think. Two narcissists wanting to be the biggest person in the room, going into battle together for being that biggest person in the room, and I think that is just unhealthy for people. Quite an interesting read. Maybe a bit too much into detail in sometimes, but I didn't try to pick up every single part of the story. It's one of the rare times where I did find the movie better than the book, but that's just because I really, really enjoyed the Nuremberg film and the company I watched it with. So yeah, still happy I read this though. World War II and how that came to be and the psychological side of things really interests me, because it is kind of vile to think that just your regular old Joe walking across the street could have the same hate, the same racism, the same fascism inside of him, and we wouldn't even know. He could be standing in front of you in the line at the bakery. He could order a nice little creme fraiche strawberry tart for his wife, surprise her with it for just the fact that it's a regular Sunday, just to celebrate love. And then the day after that he will be thinking about eradicating Jews.